Good evening, and welcome to Curated Conversations. Meet me at the Triangles, a talk and presentation featuring the artists who created the beautiful new public art piece of the same name, located at the new Marion Friartown Plaza in downtown Wheaton. Curated Conversations is a new series presented by the Wheaton Urban District, aimed to highlight the arts and arts organizations within the Wheaton Arts and Entertainment District. The Wheaton A&E District, designated by the state of Maryland in 2005, is one of 3 arts and entertainment districts in Montgomery County. Administered by the Maryland Department of Business and Economic Development through the Maryland State Arts Council, the A&E program provides tax benefits designed to boost economic development and create districts filled with artists and arts enterprises. Hi, I'm Allie Oliver Kruger from Interact Story Theater. We're a theater for young audiences and arts education organization in the Wheaton Arts and Entertainment District. Our goal is to create theater and performing arts experiences that are accessible, meaningful, and engaging, and interactive for kids and families. We believe that the arts are for everyone and everyone learns through the arts. So I'm especially thrilled we could be part of this program today and help facilitate this conversation celebrating a beautiful public art piece created for everyone. Let's start with a little housekeeping. Attendee cameras and microphones are turned off during this program, but we do invite you to participate. There are a couple ways in which you can do that. First of all, if you have questions for our artists, please put them in the Q&A section. You'll find that Q&A icon either at the top of your screen or at the bottom of your screen, depending on your device. We will have time for questions and answers at the end, and I can't wait to hear what everyone has to say. Also, please feel free to comment and respond in chat. In fact, please feel free to do that right now by letting us know where you're watching from and who you are, and just to say hi. You will have opportunities throughout our time today to put in your questions in that question answer section and to respond in chat. Finally, this program is being recorded and the video recording will be made available publicly after the program. And now at this point, I'd like to turn this over to Todd Bressi, a public art consultant who advises the Arts and Humanities Council of Montgomery County and who is part of the project team from the very beginning. Welcome, Todd, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure, and I'm thrilled to have an opportunity to talk about this project. First, I'd like to say a word about the Arts and Humanities Council. You may not know, but the Arts and Humanities Council of Montgomery County is the county's designated arts agency. In partnership with the community, the council cultivates and supports excellence in the arts and humanities, expands access to cultural expression, and contributes to the economic vitality of the region. Its programs and projects include promoting arts and culture offerings, grant making, crowdfunding, technical assistance, advocacy, and professional and business development. The Arts and Humanities Council also manages the county's public art program called the Public Art Trust, and that's the context for tonight's conversation. The role of the trust is to manage the county's collection of 400 public artworks that have been commissioned over the last 35 years, as well as 600 works on paper acquired by the county. The trust commissions new site-specific works, like the project we'll be talking about tonight. It supports other public art projects throughout the county, and it participates in the review of public art and private development. Next slide. Before I talk about the project, however, as the representative of the Arts and Humanities Council tonight, I would like to start by acknowledging that our organization works in areas that are the ancestral and unceded territory of the Accahannock, Assateague, Piscataway, Pocomoke, Shawnee, and Nos-Wawash peoples. Next slide. What I'd like to do is give you a little insight into how a project like this happens. It takes a vision, it takes time, and it takes a lot of people. Let me start by talking about the people. The Public Arts Trust did not just put a sculpture in this plaza. Public art is a very collaborative process. There's a lot of give and take, a sharing of perspectives and collaborative decision-making, all of which actually strengthens the results. So these are the entities that collaborated every step of the way to make the project happen. This project is in a plaza located next to a new office building in Wheaton. Though it's a county office building, it was built by a private developer that turned the building over to the county. So besides the Public Arts Trust, the key players were the developer, Stonebridge Caris, who actually funded most of the project, the county's Department of Transportation, which managed the development, and the Maryland National Capital Parks and Planning Commission, and the Mid-County Regional Service Center, who are the key occupants of the new building. But that's not all. The building's architect, Gensler, and the plaza's landscape architect, Oculus, played key roles in helping the artists sort out how an artwork could be located on this very complicated site. Up to a few months before the sculpture was delivered, we were still adjusting the location so it would fit in just right. Then there's the artist, the collaborating artist, and the design, fabrication, and installation team. Artist Nori Sato will tell that story in a minute. Next slide. Let's talk about vision. The urban design vision for this place was to create a central public space for a community that badly needed one, a focal point and a connector between Wheaton's commercial core and its metro station. The public art vision was to create a permanent sculpture whose stature was equal to this vision. As the public art facilitator for the project, the Public Arts Trust knew we had to find a seasoned artist, someone who had experience in integrating art into big construction projects. That's a very specialized skill. But we knew we were doing more than simply making a place. We were trying to keep a place that already existed alive. We had to accomplish more than putting a new sculpture in this space. We had to make sure this artwork authentically reflected the voice of the people in Wheaton. And we also deeply wanted Wheaton artists to have an opportunity to work on this project so that they could bring their voices and they could have their experience and they could build their experience in creating a public art project of this type. That led to one of the most important decisions we made about this project. We decided we wanted to find an artist who not only had experience creating a sculpture like this, but also had a history of collaborating with other artists and was willing to assemble and lead a team of local artists to help create this project. Again, the theme of collaboration. Next slide. With this goal in mind, the Arts and Humanities Council searched around the country for an artist by researching public artists who might have this kind of experience, then asking them to submit their portfolios for consideration through a request for qualifications process. We did not ask them to create a design. We wanted the design to evolve from the collaborative process and engagement with the community. Through our research, we assembled a pool of about 16 artists and pulled together that team I mentioned a few minutes ago, the developer, the public agencies, the designers. We looked at all the portfolios and narrowed the list down to 3 artists, one who was from this area and 2 from elsewhere in the country. We invited them all to come and take part in an interview, and we ultimately selected Nori Sato from Seattle. Nori is a seasoned public artist. She's worked in complex situations such as transit systems. She's worked as an artist planner. She's had experience working with a wide range of materials and had a deep track record of collaboration. Plus, she had family connections to the area. Those were exactly the skills we were looking for, a breadth and depth of experience, and an openness and empathetic approach to her work. And I have to say, we couldn't be more pleased with the results. Now for the exciting story, I'd like to introduce Nori Sato and have her tell you about how the project evolved.
Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here and want to thank everyone for taking time out to attend and to be able to kind of see the secrets behind what made this artwork actually happen. I want to echo Todd's thanks to everyone because truly this is a kind of work that requires so many people's input and the work of so many people. So thanks to all of the team and others who contributed in big and small ways for the project itself. Next slide. Just a quick view from above. Next slide. So one of the responsibilities I had for this project was to select a couple local artists to work with. And part of the reason is because we are always trying to expand the pool of artists who are able to work in this way. And one of the ways to give artists experience is for them to actually participate in these projects directly. So I interviewed several artists and selected 2, Adrian Lumen and Eric Ricks, who live in the area to work with me to really be part of the collaborative team. Next slide. So as a part of introduction, let me just give you a bit of background. I'm based in Seattle and I work in a way that is very contextual. That means that my work is very dependent on the site and function. And as you can kind of see from this group of images here, that they don't necessarily follow a single theme or a single style. I work in a lot of different ways, but the process that I use is really the same. And that is to go into a place, learn about it, and then try to come up with ideas that make sense for these particular projects. I want to introduce the other two artists who were really my main collaborators, Adrian and Eric. And if we can see the next slide, Adrian will talk a little bit about her work and who she is.
Thank you, Nori, and thank you so much, everyone, for coming out tonight. My name is Adrienne Moomin, and I've been living in the Wheaton area for about 15 years, and I'm primarily a studio artist. I do things by hand. I take photographs of architectural elements and urban landscapes and other things which evoke memories of a time or place, and I make multiple prints of that film negative in a traditional black and white darkroom. Then I hand cut and assemble those elements into geometric abstract collages, both 2 and 3 dimensional. So here are some examples of some of the works that I have done over the years. And I am so happy with the way our installation turned out and thrilled to have brought my aesthetic to this project. Thanks, Nori.
Next slide. These are images of Eric's work. Eric, would you like to say something?
Hi everyone. My name is Eric Ricks. I'm originally from Liberia, West Africa. I've been living in the US since the 90s, the early 90s. I've been a lifelong artist, but been practicing, been a working professional artist for the past 12 plus years. It was certainly a blessing to be a part of this process and this learning opportunity, which certainly has opened me up and helped my evolution in a large way. I started as a street artist, graffiti writer, and evolved into large-scale murals. I've been fortunate to have projects throughout the country. And as I evolve, I'm now evolving more into sculptural work. Yeah, so it's been certainly a blessing to have been a part of this program and this learning opportunity that has certainly helped my evolution.
Next slide. Thanks so much, Eric. So just a bit of how I do projects. So I really do look around, and I spent time in Wheaton. I walked around the area. I ate food in several restaurants around the old Wheaton Triangle or current Wheaton Triangle. I try to keep the triangle part alive. I looked at a variety of different sources, went to the library, went into stores, and really looked around at what things about Wheaton I thought were interesting, meaningful. And one of the things I really discovered was that there was really a lot of diversity in Wheaton, in a lot of different layers of diversity, from the type of history to the food, to the people who live here now, to people who have lived in the past, and hopefully to an interesting group that will continue to live in Wheaton on into the future. So I wanted to really think about what those things might be and how I might be able to use some of that information that I was able to gather. Next slide. You can see from this that the site itself was never really visible and never really existing. So when we were thinking about what the piece would be like, we only had drawings and to look at. So there was a lot of visualization and a lot of imagination that we had to use to kind of figure out what we wanted to do and whether it would be appropriate for the site or not. I really would like to thank the Oculus landscape architects who were very helpful in explaining their vision for what the site would be, so that I could also work into that vision and to make a piece that would make sense for this particular place. So Adrian and Eric and I spent a lot of time talking together what makes sense. We had several different ideas, some that didn't work out, some that we had to change, and we really used a lot of different ways of thinking about how an artwork could work in a site like this. Next slide. So then we came up with a concept that's based on the idea of triangles. The whole idea was to create a piece that people could experience, not just look at, a piece that people could really kind of walk around and see, and to see different aspects of it. And a piece that wouldn't always be visible at like everything all at one time, but would evolve. The more you looked at it, the more things that you might see. So initially we made a proposal that you can see right here is a very conceptual look at what the artwork would look like. And we had to take this proposal through an approval process. So here you can see that we developed two triangular structures that one could walk through and in. It consisted of three different aspects: the outside panels that were to be laser cut steel, stainless steel, some three-dimensional cast bronze objects that would live inside, and then a connecting piece that I call the crown, and that would also be part of the whole structure and kind of pull the two pieces together. Next slide. This is how we envisioned the piece might look from the back, and to give a sense of how the piece could be experienced. Next slide. And then we really looked at what dimensions made sense, and we developed a series of dimensions that we thought would make sense for the site itself, for the structure, for the artwork, in order to give a sense of place and a sense of commanding the space that we really wanted to have. So we developed these ideas and dimensions, and then we went for approvals to several different committees that had to look at it and say, okay, fine, you can go ahead with it. It's a little vague right now, but we will move ahead with it. And then we went through the trouble. It really wasn't trouble, actually. It was a lot of fun to think about how it would be made. I was lucky to have worked with a fabricator, Kevin Maud from Metal Arts Foundry in Utah, and thought he would be the perfect fabricator to produce this work for us. And so we went into conversation about how we might make it. He had ideas, I had ideas, and then we worked through what it might be. Next slide. So initially, because the drawings are a little bit vague, I wanted to see how the piece would look in 3 dimensions. I made a working model, which is made out of paper and wire and wood, actually sticks, that I tried to kind of get a sense of how a piece might work in 3 dimensions. So this is a small mock-up or model that I made that really allowed us to look around and kind of see, and really made a 2-dimensional drawing much more real. Then we talked about, Eric and Adrian and I talked about the possibility of putting objects inside that would give something small, some details about Wheaton life that we were interested in reproducing in bronze. And we talked about what those objects might be, things that were meaningful to us, that were meaningful to Wheaton, that were meaningful to how we live life, some aspects of the past, some playful, some slightly abstract, and to really try to come up with things that were interesting, that might be able to kind of generate some stories and imagination as we moved along. Next slide. You can kind of see how we looked at these objects. We put some together. We made some out of clay. We collected some from various sources. So a variety of different ways that we developed to come up with objects that could be cast in bronze. Next slide. We talked a lot about how the panels would function and how we would put patterns into the panel itself. And this image gives me an opportunity to introduce Maritza Rivera, who is a poet. And we thought it would be really great to have some poetry incorporated in the work itself as well. And so we selected her to come up with some poetry that we could use cut in the stainless steel panels. So Maritza, do you mind saying a little bit about some of the poetry that we included?
Absolutely. First of all, Nori, thank you for having included me in this project. And I think we met about 2 or 3 times over the years, and because I needed to get a sense of, without knowing what the art would look like, a sense of poetry that would relate, that different people could relate to. So the first poem that I knew was going to be included was one that kids really have fun with, and that's the first poem was the one that I absolutely knew would be included, because kids kind of like the fact that it's 4 words, 4 letters, and it's in the shape of a 4. So that's a concrete poem. The others, for example, Stalker, the moon is something that everyone can relate to. And then I also included a couple of others, and one that spoke to Sin Fronteras, one in Spanish, because the population in Wheaton is very diverse. There are a lot of Spanish-speaking residents there. And after working there for a few years, I kind of had a flavor for what Wheaton was like. And so I really felt it was important to include something in Spanish that related to just humanity. Sin Fronteras is about unity, if nothing else. The other challenge for me that Nori gave me was to keep the poetry short. And luckily for me, there is a style of poetry that I use that's called Blackjack. And so it's a 3-line poem. Each line has 7 syllables, which totals 21, which is equivalent to Blackjack. So it was really a challenging project. And I sent Nori several different poems, and she made the final selections of which ones were incorporated into the sculpture.
Thanks, Maritza. And then I wanted to also say that Adrienne was a very important part of this project as well, in terms of, and one of the reasons I selected her is her interest in architecture and making patterns from architecture. And so Adrienne and I spent a couple days walking around Wheaton, and Adrienne spent even more after that, taking photographs of what I call vernacular architecture around Wheaton, architecture of houses, some of the commercial buildings as well. And we tried to incorporate those along with other images that are Wheaton related into the artwork itself. Adrienne, do you want to say anything about that?
Yes, Nori, thank you. So having lived here for 15 years, I like to think that I have quite a sense of what the resources of the area are. So you can see the butterfly, which is representative, I feel, of Brookside Gardens and the butterflies there. We have a skating rink in Wheaton, so we've got an ice skate. We've got a carousel horse because we've got a carousel. But the surprising thing was that I wasn't as familiar as I might have been with the architecture of this area. There are certain architectural styles from the period that most of this area was built. And so I found a number of these Federalist style pediments, which are absolutely fascinating to me. And there's one that is actually, the one that you see there is what was duplicated and arranged into a curved fan-like shape. And I just love that so much. And I walk to the sculpture quite often because it's pretty near my house, and I pass that house every time. And it's just a wonderful connection for me. The image at the bottom right is a xylophone in the playground behind the library, which is also within walking distance of where I live. And we abstracted it and duplicated it, so it shows some origin of the original photo and the original shape, but it's also makes something new. Thanks.
Thanks. Next slide. Oh, I did want to say one thing. It was very interesting because the butterfly that you saw in the other image relates also to Eric, who includes butterflies frequently in his other work, and also to Maritza, who is Mariposa poet. So I thought that was a really great conjunction of things. And here are just some other images that were inspirations for how we might do the patterning on the outside of the panels. Next slide. The crown itself, we were trying to imagine how it would be. It's a whole tangle of triangles. And we wanted to also include within that tangle of triangles some little objects that you might be able to find hidden inside. So I encourage you to look further when you see the actual artwork to see what some of those might be. Next slide. So part of the making of the artwork itself really requires engaging with the fabricator. We really depend on the fabricators to do the work that we want. But for me, the dialogue and the interaction with the fabricators is super, super important. And so I really value the kind of relationship that I've developed with Kevin in terms of being able to really work well together and understanding each other's way of working. But I also wanted Adrian and Eric to have a bit of that experience as well. And especially since neither of them had really worked with fabricators like Kevin before, we went on a little field trip to Salt Lake City to work at Kevin's shop. And here are just some images of us on our day of arrival in Salt Lake City. And we were able to see there not only a couple other projects, public art projects that I had done in Salt Lake City that Kevin had made, but also we ran into an art fair that was going on, a nice art experience, and then some other public art projects around Salt Lake City, as well as looking at the fantastic architecture that the city has. So that was a really good initial introduction to the area, and neither Eric nor Adrian had been to Salt Lake City before, so that was a really good time that we had to explore. Next. And then we ended up the next day starting work at the foundry itself, and had a variety of different experiences, first looking around at the foundry and what was there, and also getting a sense of what was possible. And of course, they can do anything, really. But it's always great to kind of see what they do and how they work, and just look around and see what kind of samples and other things that might be available there. Next slide. I know that Eric was especially kind of drawn to the whole bronze casting process. And I wonder if maybe, Eric, you can kind of go into it a little bit about this experience of being at the foundry and wandering around and looking and learning.
Certainly, certainly. Well, for starters, I'd like to say thanks a lot to Kevin and the guys at Metal Art Foundry for their gracious hospitality. The tour for me was like a Disneyland tour. It was the most eye-opening learning experience that I've had as an artist at the moment. Seeing the different parts of the process and seeing the truly limitless capability that these guys are able to pull off whatever an artist could imagine is truly mind-boggling, and excited to have been close enough, thanks to this project, to learn and observe all these things.
So the process that they use for the bronze casting is called lost wax. And you can kind of see from some of these images here that they work from molds and then make wax castings from the molds. And then they put the casting, the wax into, they cover it with this, what they call slurry, which is kind of a plaster sand mix. And Kevin, please feel free to chime in on this. And to make it hard enough and to make it so that the bronze can be poured in. And you can kind of see that the bronze pouring process is very hot. And the crucibles are carrying the molten bronze. And when they pour them into the slurried, I guess, cast wax pieces, the wax melts away, and then all that's left is the bronze. And that's partly why it's called the lost wax process, if any of you are familiar with that particular term. So next slide. So part of our challenge to the foundry was we had a whole different mix of objects and things that we really wanted to have cast. And here you can kind of see the variety of objects that we were trying to cast. And feel free, Eric and Adrian and Kevin, really to chime in on some of these things. But you can see there are a variety of different materials, a variety of different types. All things require a lot of careful attention as well.
The hunt accumulating these things were also an interesting journey as well. We visited a lot of local thrift stores and places and collected things that were literally from the area to incorporate into this sculptural project. I was fortunate to sculpt my first musical instrument, which is on the bottom of this image. And also to have my roses, which are made from recycled spray cans, and a symbol of transformation and renewal. And to have that included into this whole project, which is a process of renewal, was a beautiful thing for me to see. Nori?
Thanks. Next slide.
Nori, this is Kevin, and
Yeah.
I might add in an interesting thing about that previous slide was when you and I and we were talking about this for a period of time before we actually started building it. And then when you started showing up and sending, and your team started sending more and more and more and more objects, well, we said to everybody, we're going to need a bigger sculpture.
Yes, so you can kind of see here some of the wax transformations of some of the objects that you saw on the table, the mishmash of objects that you saw on the table previously. And some of the objects really needed additional work once they were cast in wax. because the wax casting process, you lose some details, you add others, and because it's wax, you can still sculpt it in a way that makes sense. So here are just some other transformations of some of the objects, and then you can kind of see how they get covered in the slurry. Next slide. And here is the molten lava being poured into the various slurry covered wax pieces. And from this state, you can't really see what the objects are because first of all, they're covered in the slurry, but all those little legs that you see are connectors that are made so that the bronze will flow to all the appropriate places.
I might clarify one thing, Nori.
Okay.
At this point, all the wax has been removed. And so it's removed in a different process prior to this. So these are just hollow shells now.
Oh, that's right, because they're heated up in the oven, or I'm not sure you call it the oven, a kiln, I guess, before. So that's great clarification. Thanks. Next slide. So here are the objects, the various objects that now have been cast in bronze. So they've lost the character of what they were, but not completely. It's amazing how the bronze casting process still carries all the detail from the original objects, but now they're all the same material. They're all bronze. And when they come out of the molds, they're kind of a dull looking thing, actually. Some of them require more work, putting some pieces together. Others require other kinds of work that happens in the shop itself. Next slide. And then here the objects are, once they've been finished with their patina, and they again kind of emerge back to the character of the originals. Next. Just some of the objects themselves. I particularly love a couple of these because this, for instance, is at the bottom, some pink ballet slippers that are soft to begin with, but now they're hard bronze, and yet they still keep that softness in their character. And not to mention the ball skein of yarn, which if you were to touch that in the sculpture would be hard, and yet that it remains and keeps that kind of softness of the feeling of yarn itself. Next. Then Adrian and I worked on patterns for the outside of the panels. And you can kind of see from this image how the pattern of the base of the clock tower in the Wheaton Square there has been transformed into a pattern that we translated into the panels themselves. And Adrian, feel free to chime in on this. Next slide. And here you can see that the elements are really transformed from what they once were, as this Federalist pediment was, into and repeated several times and made into something else. Next slide. I know this is Adrian's favorite, one of Adrian's favorite, and mine as well, where we were able to turn this particular pediment into what we call the wings of the sculpture by repeating it several times and altering kind of where it came from and then what it became. Next slide. Finally, we laid them out onto the panels directly and made the pieces ready for cutting by laser cutting. So the panels here are the exact shape of the panels, and they were sent to the laser cutters who cut all the holes into it. I do want to say something about those 4 little triangles that are up at the top left there. They are panels that came from the transmission tower. And I don't know how many of you know that Wheaton had one of the very first image transmissions in the world, the kind of precursor to television. So the whole idea of transmission is really important part of Wheaton. And I am in love with the whole idea of transmission as well. And so I wanted to use the towers as part of elements for the sculpture. Next. Kevin, could you talk a little bit about the fabrication of the sculpture and how it was put together?
Yes, I would. And thank you, Wheaton, for giving us the opportunity to build this project with Nori. At the Foundry, we work very, very hard not to be involved with any of the artistic approach. We just try to have art where the cables or the suspensions don't show. And that's what the artist has hired us to do, is to take artists have a very difficult job to pull images out of air and in their brain and then put it into paper, drawings, sculptures that we can then produce. And so everything you see here really began with Nori and her team, as you gleaned from the earlier conversation. What we tried to do is to just make it safe for the public, strong enough that it will hold up as far as public art requires, and then just handle all of the fabrication approaches that the artists don't want to deal with. And so what we did here with that picture on the left is the wings were just a flat, and we had to turn that into a 3-dimensional piece. And so we cut it out of cardboard and scaled it several different times for Nori and her team to get the right scale for it there. And then panels don't come as big as lasers will. Lasers can't cut panels as large many times as they need to be. So we need to seam them and weld them together. So even though this sculpture looks like it's one big panel, it was actually several panels welded together. And we strategically had to put the welds in between certain patterns to make that flow.
Next slide.
You can see some of the seams there that haven't been fully worked, and in on site, our goal is that you can never find any of the seams. The artwork on the side panels aren't really designed for engineering or for structural, and so the tubes are all of the structure. They're the bones, so to speak, of it. And artists have a difficult job sometimes trying to integrate and accept and embrace the bolts and the nuts and the structures that's required for the artwork to actually be functional in the public. And so we tried to work corners and seams and angles with the artist to try to add more to it than just if they're wanting it not to appear just like an engineered bridge, but they want to add something interesting and clever to it. And so this one, we tried to make all the edges very soft and very rounded, and they weren't 90 degrees. So it looks almost like a piece of cast stainless steel.
Yeah, we're going to have to move along really quickly through this process. So I'm just going to go to the next slide, and you can kind of see the piece unfold. Here are the wings flat. Next slide. And then you can see them, they're rolled and then attached to the structure itself. Next slide. And here we are doing some kind of placement of some of the bronze objects before they're all fixed. We're trying to figure out where they would all go. Next slide. This is the crown that's being built, and we're trying to adjust everything. And I have to look at because we're in COVID times, we did a lot of this via photography, and I was very grateful for the kind of dedication that the Foundry really showed to this work. Next slide. So you can kind of see how the crown is coming together. The railroad tracks are visible there. It's still in fabrication. All the seams have not been smoothed out. You can kind of see still how all the parts fit together. But at this point, I think I really felt like, all right, it's September, the piece is nearly done. I haven't seen it in real life. I better go and take a look. So I finally kind of said, all right, put on your mask and get to Lehigh. Next slide. So there I am looking at all the various details, and Kevin and I are talking about things, and we're putting Eric's roses up on it, saying, let's put it here, let's put it there, as well as looking at how the whole piece feels. Do we need to make any alterations? And next slide. And here's Brian applying the special patina on the inside, which is a special patina that Metal Arts Foundry does. It's a heat applied color. Next slide. You can see they're finally placing the objects onto the piece itself. Next slide. The pieces are all welded on, by the way. So it's very, very strong. Then guess what? The piece gets on the truck on its way to Wheaton. Next slide. A few days later, it arrives at Wheaton. And here we are, ready to install at 2:30 in the morning. Next slide. The crane picks the pieces off the truck. Next slide. There it is, flying over to its location. It's really amazing to kind of see how the cranes can pick up these. I mean, I know this is what they're meant to do, but they just seem so effortlessly flying across the space there. Next slide. Here's Kevin directing it, making sure that it gets in the right location. Next slide. If we don't put them in the correct place, then the crown doesn't fit either. So there's a lot of moving back and forth. And once they're set, they're pretty difficult to move. So we had to really make sure they were in the correct location. Next slide. Here comes the crown. This is the big test. Did we put the pieces in the correct location? Next slide. And poor Brian had to climb on the crown itself, just showing how strong it is, because once the crown was attached, we realized we didn't have a ladder that was tall enough for him to unhook the crane. So he braved his way across and unhooked the crane. Next slide. And then there's various adjustments that need to be made once the pieces are in place, and a few bits of welding that needed to be done. Next slide. And you can see that the night is unfolding as we move along here. Fog rolls in. Next slide. And then the pieces are bolted onto the foundation, which has been placed underneath the pavers. So you can see Kevin is drilling. Next slide. And then we get to see the work for the first time really on site. You can see the way the sun acts on the surface. Next slide. Some views of the objects that you can see that are placed on the piece itself or inside. Next slide. And I really invite those of you who are in Wheaton and can go and look to really explore the piece itself and how the various lighting conditions change it, how the light works through the piece itself and projects onto the floor. Next slide. And how you can kind of see it. Maritza, I wanted you to say something a little bit about this particular poem because I think it's very meaningful.
Well, that is a very powerful poem, and for several different reasons. Earth Angel is dedicated to my brother who passed away in 2014, but it's also an example of the Blackjack poetry that I was describing earlier. And the fact that a lot of the work that I write also honors my ancestors. So when my mom was visiting last year, and when she read this poem, she burst into tears because she had actually never seen a lot of my poetry. And the fact that you mentioned it before, that the butterflies were there also, was just really, really meaningful for me. But it has a really strong impact. Just I think the imagery, but it has some personal meaning for me. And I thought, what a better way to honor someone who was so important to me than, on this sculpture.
Thanks. Next slide. Just some more images, and I know that most of you will be able to see it in person, so I won't dwell on it, but some of you will not. So just some images of the piece itself. Next slide. It's great the way that sun casts shadows through and on the sculpture. Next slide. And here's the crown. You can see Eric's roses on the piece itself as well. Next slide. And really the whole piece is about people and about people looking and enjoying the work itself. So I encourage everyone to do that and to really look at the objects and to be able to kind of make your own stories about what those objects mean and some of the relationships between the objects themselves. Next slide. So I know we're running really late on the time for question and answer, but maybe we can all appear. You can see us all in person.
Yes,
And
at
then
this point.
we'll.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Noria. Yes, at this point, I invite everyone to please, panelists, please all turn on your camera so that we can see you and we can give you a very gracious and grateful round of applause for your wonderful work. My apologies for interrupting you, Noria.
Oh, no problem at all.
Great.
Sorry
Well,
for running a little late, but really, if you have questions, please.
yes, in fact, I would like to turn it over to Sydney Cooper, the Marketing and Events Manager for the Wheaton Urban District. I know I learned so much about this piece, and when I walk downtown again tomorrow, I'm going to look at this piece with a whole new set of eyes, thanks to that wonderful presentation. So thank you so much. Sydney, over to you. Oh, Sydney, you're muted. It's okay.
All this rehearsal, right? Thanks, everyone. As Allie mentioned, I'm Sydney Cooper, the Marketing and Events Manager for the Wheaton Urban District. And the Urban District manages the Wheaton Arts and Entertainment District. And with this new installation being the focal point in our A&E district, we thought it was really important to highlight this piece and the wonderful artists behind it, giving it the attention it deserves. And I think I can speak for the entire Wheaton community in saying that this art piece just makes us really proud. It's really beautiful. So thank you, to everyone who is a part of the process, especially the artists, Nori, Adrian, Eric B, and Maritza. So with that said, I think we have maybe just a couple questions. So I think that's good, especially with our timing. Let's see here. Someone asked, Vicky asked, why roses? Eric B. And I think you might have to unmute too. You did what I did.
Why, thank you. Well, I actually started with butterflies. When I turned 36, I started on this process of making 3,600 butterflies. But a friend of mine jokingly said to me, I'm kind of making butterflies with nothing to feed them. So the Phoenix rose were the natural evolution to my process in trying to create a smaller footprint.
And I was really taken by this whole idea of Eric making murals, then using the empty spray cans, cutting them up to make the roses. So that was very, very important as well.
Okay, we have another question. How big was the mock-up, Lori? The paper mock-up, the paper wood mock-up in the beginning that you mentioned?
Sorry. It was 1 inch to 1 foot in size. Oh, sorry. And so the piece was the mock-up was about 17 inches tall.
Okay. Interesting. An anonymous person asked, talk about the Ethiopian poetry, please. And I know we didn't mention well, I know his name was mentioned in the beginning slides, but there was also someone who contributed some Ethiopian poetry to the artwork.
Right. The piece was contributed by a member of the Ethiopian community, Professor Akamayala Debela. I'm not sure I pronounced his name properly, but he was so gracious to contribute this. And the piece itself is not exactly poetry, but it's really more a text of thanks from the community to be included in the artwork. So it's very interesting to kind of see the different ways that one can incorporate different communities, I think, within the piece itself, and to put text in that isn't really translated was important to me, because I wanted there to have some engagement with people. So if you wanted to know what the piece said, you have to go find someone who knows the language and ask them. That we are not making it easy for you. And that would encourage interaction between people.
Great. I do want to be mindful of time, and I know that Allie will cut me off when it is appropriate. But we do have just a couple more questions here. Fran asks, are there words included that are not part of the poetry in the piece?
No. The words that are included were put in either by Maritza or by our Professor Debela, and otherwise there aren't any words, but there is the letter A that comes from the Anchor Inn. It's a very distinctive letter, and I encourage you to look for it, see if you find that. That's what it means. It doesn't mean anything. I mean, it can mean other things, of course, but the origin was from that bit of Wheaton history, current, past.
Well, I'll be looking out for the A next time I'm in Wheaton. and this is more of a comment. I went by today. It's so beautiful and much more interesting after the presentation, which I think is the great thing about this presentation, that it really gives you a new perspective about the piece and really, like you mentioned, Nori, for those who haven't been or those who have, to really go, there's so much to see, just going one time really isn't enough, and it allows you to kind of come back over and over again and really kind of see something new every time.
It would be great if people could contribute any stories that they might make up from putting the objects together in their mind, like this reminds me of this, and these two objects relate in a certain way. I think that that's part of the story. And I know that Eric and Adrian and I spent a lot of time trying to figure out where to put the objects and which objects should go together and what they mean. But I think part of it is that it's a lot more open-ended than what we were thinking necessarily. And, we were thinking about, oh, this is about work. These objects are tools. These are, about house and how we do more domestic wear. But in the end, a lot of these things are used in so many different ways that we're really interested in how they might relate to various aspects of people's lives, whether they live in Wheaton or not, and kind of can serve to connect people with the artwork and with the town of Wheaton as well.
Well, there is so much appreciation being voiced in the chat, not only for your beautiful artwork, but for taking the time to share your insight and your processes in this. Dan Thompson has brought up a really intriguing idea, which I want to toss out there. Can you install a QR code at the site with a link to a recording by the artist describing the sculpture? That may be something really interesting to consider. And as you have those ideas, how can Sydney, as we have ideas, if we want to share our stories, if we want to know more, what's the best way to get in touch with somebody or to put that out there?
Yeah, and I love Dan's question, and it's something that we are going to do because it's something that I was thinking about. So great minds, Dan. But we will. And any questions, you can reach us on, going to the website, wheatonmd.org. Our contact information is there. And we will be posting this webinar, which will include some bonus footage of the early morning installation, the video version of what Nori kind of showed at the very end there. And so we will be sharing it on social media early next week. So please go to our, Facebook, Twitter, our handles WheatonMD, at WheatonMD, I'm sorry, and as well as the Arts and Humanities Council's website or their social media, which is also at Creative MoCo.
Excellent. And I believe we have a slide with that wheatonmd.org. So there's that URL that you can go to for more information or to reach out to contact folks. Once again, a big, wonderful round of applause for our artists. We're so happy that you could be here today, and to our community members, both near and far. We're so glad you joined us today for this program. If you'd like more information, do go to wheatonmd.org, and please come back for our next curated conversation. I'm Allie Oliver Kruger from Interact Story Theater, and it's been my sincere pleasure to be your host. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.